Hello and welcome back to Bold TV. I'm David Grasso. Today, I want to talk about the economy and problems that we have in the economy, specifically with monopolies. Here to talk about that is a friend of mine and of Bold TV, Matt Stoller. He's the author of Goliath. How you doing today, Matt?
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
So what's the general problem in our economy so that people understand what the landscape is like and why it's so hard to be middle class in America today?
Yeah, so you got a number of, the people know something is wrong, and sometimes they say, "Oh, it's capitalism," or "Oh, they sort of ascribe an ism to it." But what's really happening is we have a crisis of concentration in our economy. So monopolization, was pretty rare before the 1980s, but today it's a systemic feature of the American economy. So monopolization is that one company or a small group of companies control a branch of trade. They set the terms, they set the pricing, they decide what you get paid. And we see this in everything from things like search engines to electric utilities and seeds and chemicals, big markets, but you also see it in small markets, like things like mail sorting software or peanut butter or pool supply distribution. And so everywhere in the economy, and this is all a result of policy changes, so that we essentially legalized monopolization about 30 years ago. But what the net effect is, all of us feel like we're being controlled and manipulated by these unseen forces. And we ascribe this sometimes to weird conspiracy theories. But what's really happening is that our markets are increasingly controlled by a small group of people who usually live in distant cities and make decisions that are not necessarily, good for us. And that's where we are right now. And so, our wages are lower, prices are higher. There's money's getting stripped from our communities. It's two or three times as hard to start a new business as it used to be. There's racial inequities. It's just a total mess. And then I keep talking about it, but monopolization is upstream from a lot of social problems that we usually look at in isolation, but are in fact connected to this consolidation.
Yeah, I always think of in today's modern world when I think about monopolies like Walgreens and CVS. We have two pharmacies, we have four airlines: Southwest Airlines, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, and United, right? And there's so many industries like this. We have Apple and Google. How did we get here? Why are these massive industries controlled by such few players?
Yeah, so really from the American Revolution all the way into the 1970s, we had pretty strong rules against monopolies. They took a lot of different forms. Usually people know them as antitrust rules. But the board game Monopoly came from that cultural and political and legal tradition. Well, in the late 1970s, we decided as a society, and our policymakers on the right and left, for a variety of reasons, said, you know what, we don't care about market power anymore. All we care about is whether a company can deliver low consumer prices. And if they can do that, then it doesn't matter if they're a monopoly. It doesn't matter if they're big, right? Whereas, we used to say, if you're big and powerful, we're suspicious of you. After the 1970s, we said, no, that's fine. And so what you saw is a company like Walmart, right, where their slogan, everyday low prices, was able to roll up power across our economy. Everyday low prices, so low prices to consumers, but they effectively got rid of tens of thousands or thousands of family-owned stores, and they started setting terms and conditions for anybody who makes something that has to sell to retail America, right? And but it wasn't just Walmart. And Walmart was one example of it, but you saw, in the rest of the retail industry got rolled up into chains and department stores. You also saw this in banking. You saw it in agricultural seeds and chemicals and meat packing. You see it in first you saw it with Microsoft and software, and then later on, as we put this revolutionary technology of the internet, you saw the emergence of Amazon and Facebook and Google. So we're in a situation where you had this political revolution that people didn't really notice in the 1980s onward, which was just getting rid of anti-monopoly rules that then allowed all this mergers and consolidation and abuse of market power. And layered onto that, you then have this technological revolution of the internet and convergence between telecommunications and media and computers. And that has created the modern world that we're living in today, which seems very confusing and doesn't feel like the sort of understanding of justice that we have in America, that everybody kind of counts, People aren't exactly economically equal, but everybody should count. That doesn't feel like the way things work. And the reason is because the way we used to see democracy operating in the commercial sphere is through our anti-monopoly rules. And we said you shouldn't be able, just like you had checks and balances in government, you had checks and balances in commerce, but that was competition. If I don't like what you're doing, I can buy from someone else, or I can work for someone else, or I can start my own business. We got rid of that. And so we are all effectively living in a whole bunch of mini autocracies in commerce. And that's what's happening. That's why there's so much frustration and anger. That's why our inequality is getting so much worse.
Yeah, let's talk about the financialization of the economy as well, which is something you touch on in your book a lot. It seems like no one's in the business of building real things anymore. They just kind of move money around, destroy jobs, devastate communities, and somehow make off with big pots of money. How is that allowed to happen?
Yeah. So one of sort of the intellectually tricky things that the law and economics movement, that's the movement that sort of took over our policymaking in the 1980s. One of the things they did is they substituted the traditional language of competition, which used to mean, having multiple people buying or selling things. And they said that actually is not what competition means. Competition is financial speculation. So we're competing in, we have a very competitive market. Let's just look at the stock market. There's people buying and selling and trying to, beat each other. And that feels like competition. It is a form of competition. It's financial speculation. But in our actual underlying markets for goods and services, there's much more consolidation. And when you look at antitrust and finance, those two sort of pieces of the world, or monopolies in finance, they're effectively, the traditional way of understanding this, those are effectively middlemen. Finance connects savers and investors in the economy writ large, and monopolists tend to, Amazon is a trading monopoly. They connect buyers and sellers and so on and so forth. Those were traditionally seen as the enemies of real business and industry and labor and farmers. And so we put really serious controls on them to make sure that they didn't get out of hand. And now we have, these are the guys that are in charge. And so what you see is that it's really hard to enter any normal line of business, but it's really easy to borrow a bunch of money to speculate. At least if you're on Wall Street, it's easy to do that. And so what you're seeing is more and more attention is being dedicated to speculation. I mean, the Fed says we have some problems in our economy. We have to we have to spend some money, get people active, which, traditionally it's like, oh, then we'll start building more factories or houses or things that people need. But now, because the economy is so concentrated, when the Fed tries to push a bunch of money into the economy, it ends up going to speculation. And that's what effectively we're seeing. I know we've seen some things with GameStop, but GameStop is just the sort of the latest and perhaps the most high profile illustration of just the speculative nature of our economy.
So what do we do? And do you think, Matt, this is why everyone kind of understands something is wrong, and whether you're on the left or the right, our politics have gotten a little crazy? We can all kind of admit that, extremism has increased, wealth gaps have increased, and just the general perception of American life and our quality of life has declined.
Yeah, I think that people have lost faith in our political and commercial institutions for good reason. They don't seem to be delivering. It's pretty hard to say, oh, I trust, any number of, like, I trust the media or I trust the government or whatever, when they're just not, they don't seem trustworthy. And this has been true for me, it was watching the war in Iraq. And that I was just like, it's really hard to trust the media. It's really hard to trust the government when that's what you see. But you've seen this kind of continuously. But I think there's a reaction since the financial crisis, when all of a sudden, part of the trick in the 80s was to say, oh, all that stuff about competition and private power, that's not political, that's technical. Let the economists, who are sort of scientists, let them solve that in these like complex regulatory agencies, and they're very well paid economists, and they're just basically agents of monopoly. And what we saw in the financial crisis was that I think people realize that banks and corporations are not, in fact, just neutral technical institutions. They're political institutions. And how we organize commerce are political questions that all of us should be able to participate in. And so since the financial crisis, you've seen slowly at first, but more quickly now, a revitalization of our anti-monopoly traditions. And you're seeing a lot of arguments about we need to do something about large technology firms, but also about concentration in the rest of the economy. You see calls for stronger financial regulation. So there are 5 antitrust suits from various government agencies against Google and Facebook for monopolizing ad markets and killing our newspapers and radicalizing people in very weird and annoying ways. I think you're going to see that expand, I think you're going to see much more aggressive regulatory and antitrust action in the agricultural space. Tom Vilsack was just talking to that today in his nominating here. He's going to be the Secretary of Agriculture. So I think you're going to see, and in some of those antitrust cases were brought by Republicans, some of them by Democrats. So this isn't necessarily a partisan thing. So there's a ton of noise right now, and anger and frustration, and people really feel like the right or the left is their mortal enemy. But underlying that, there is at least a consensus that these large technology firms are a problem. There is a consensus that corporate concentration is a real problem. And now it's a matter of working through the institutions and changing the law and changing the way the judges rule, the kind of slow march through the institutions to start to restore democracy in the commercial sector.
Well, hopefully social media doesn't suppress this because I really enjoyed this. On that note, Matt, thank you so much. Your book, I don't take a lot of time to read books, but I did take the time to read yours. I was on vacation. It was very pleasant. So thank you very much for contributing to this conversation and for foremost for being nonpartisan. I noticed at your talk that, you said you have a lot in common with the left and the right, and then even though Elizabeth Warren wrote the foreword there to your book, you do try to appeal on the right. So we really appreciate your bipartisan view on monopolies and market concentration. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks a lot.